Hey, everybody, I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. And yesterday we started what will be the first half or maybe first third, we'll see how it goes, of a conversation about a really weird verbal exchange that ends in a miracle between Jesus and a Canaanite woman outside the geographic historical boundaries of the Jewish people. Jesus is way out in the middle of nowhere, far from home, and weirdly, some lady who isn't even Jewish recognizes him, calls him the son of David, which, as we've established from other parts of Matthew, including the first verse of Matthew, is a messianic title. And Jesus doesn't even answer, and then when he does finally answer, it seems pretty contentious. We're in the process of trying to get to the bottom of why and what exactly is going on here, with the ultimate goal of breaking down the different possible explanations for all of that. You are now up to speed. If you didn't catch yesterday, you can go back and listen to it if you feel like, or we can just roll from here. I'm going to have Jeff play some music, and we'll get right back into it. Time to reset the passage. Matthew 15:21 says, leaving that place, Jesus withdrew to the region of Tyre and Sidon. That's a Gentile region. And a Canaanite woman from that vicinity came to him crying out, Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me. Again, she is ascribing to Jesus a very special, very unique title. And if we aren't sure that that's what she meant, it becomes really clear when she next says, my daughter is suffering terribly from demon possession. This sounds a lot like Matthew chapter 8 and the also Gentile centurion who approaches Jesus after the Sermon on the Mount and is like, my servant's sick. Can you help me out? And Jesus is like, not only can I handle sickness, I can handle distance. We've got this. We're taken care of. And he speaks very positively of the guy. So most people, the first time they read Matthew, don't take 350 episodes to get this far. We're moving, admittedly, a little bit slower than most. So if you're just reading right through it, the original audience, the modern audience, anybody would still have that Matthew 8 thing fresh in their brain. And you would expect, given those plot beats and thematic beats, that Jesus is going to be like, okie dokie. Yeah, right on. You are a person of great faith, and let's be friendly right away. Here you go. But that isn't what we get. What we get instead is this. Jesus did not answer a word. Well, why are you being like this? So his disciples came to him and urged him, send her away, for she keeps crying out after us. Do you have a kid sibling that would sometimes hang around with you and you didn't want him to hang around with you? Look, we're not going to turn this thing into like sad time or anything, but my brother's gone now. And so I deeply regret that at times when I was a kid, I was the big brother that was like, oh my goodness, okay, time to go away, little fella. That's good. It's Matt's older friend's time now. And we hung out a lot too. But there were definitely moments also where my friends would come along and they would be like, honestly, like having a kid brother around is kind of a drag. Can you give him something else to do? And sometimes I was like, no, because I'm a good brother, so you can stuff it. He's hanging out with us. Good job, me. But other times I succumbed to that. And I was like, yeah, social pressure wise, okay, I'm feeling that too. I'm going to send him off to go play with somebody else or do something else, to my unending shame. But all of that to say, if you get that social dynamic, then you can get what's going on here. It's annoying. We're trying to have a corporate retreat. Like we're on a hike in the cedars of Lebanon. It's pretty up here. We're trying to take in the sights. And this lady just keeps following us around, crying about things. They look at Jesus to take social cues from him. And he's not even doing anything about it. He's not saying anything about it. And so they're like, okay, can you just make her go away then? Because she won't shut up and she's ruining nature. But then in verse 24, Jesus, who is acting in a confusing way here, at least at first glance, says to the disciples only, I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel. Now, I have to assume that she's like standing right there. I mean, they're in the woods, just walking along. And, there's Shirley. And she's like, hey, I could hear that because I'm right here crying out after you. You remember the thing about my daughter? Because she's super demon possessed and I hate that. And I had heard that you could do something about it. And I believe that you can. So if you just could, please, like, this is weird that nobody's talking to me. So Jesus makes this remark and she's like, I guess I'm not messing around anymore with like hanging out in the line of disciples here. I'm just going to run up to Jesus and badger him some more. So the woman physically takes it to the next level by coming up and kneeling before him. Lord, help me, she said. She's begging. Now, I don't know how many of you have kids at this point, but for those of you who do, what wouldn't you do for them? If your kid was legitimately suffering, I got a couple of friends in my life who are dealing with their kids legitimately suffering right now. It's a tough thing. It's tough to hear about. It's hard to know what to do as a friend with the stuff that they're going through and dealing with and trying to figure out right now. And it sounds so trite to be like, oh, and your heart just breaks for him. But it does, because I got kids, and I can't imagine what it would feel like to go through the stuff that some of my friends are going through right now. It's brutal. And I know dang well that those friends who I've talked with a lot about what they're dealing with, if they believed that there was some guy who was hiking through the woods by their house that with a word could resolve what their kid's going through, they would do anything. They would run out. They would physically block his path and be like, please, I am begging you, hear what's going on, do something. If he tried to walk around him, they might fall to their knees and try to trip him or make it so he couldn't go by. There's a degree of desperation and parental compassion that happens. And it's a lot like Peter with the walking on water thing. You know, you're in the middle of a stormy sea and you're going to drown and die in that big, heavy cloak that they all wore back then, getting all waterlogged. And you got a boat that's made of wood that you know floats to your right a few feet away in the waves. And as you're sinking, you've got a guy walking on water to your left a few feet away. That's going to be quite the moment of truth, isn't it? You're going to swim to whatever you think has the best chance of bailing you out. And Peter in that moment calls out to Jesus. This woman is in metaphorically the same kind of moment. She could scramble for one thing or scramble for the other, and in that moment of desperation, she is not going to let Jesus pass by. And this is not just a repetition of a motif we see about Gentiles, but there's also a repetition of a motif we see about women here, that we get more than one account in the Gospels of a woman being insistent on acknowledging Jesus, on worshiping Jesus, on sneaking up to get close enough to his power to discreetly resolve her very socially, culturally unsightly disorder that she's dealing with. And so in this act of desperation, we get a really clear sense of what it is that she actually believes. She wants to do an end run around this whole Jew-Gentile thing. Whatever. My kid is in this kind of situation, and I believe you can do something about it. And then Jesus replies, it looks like to her, because it says he replied, it is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to their dogs. Wow. And again, I come back to the kid version of me reading this and being like, was he under mind control? Did the devil invent some sort of headband that allows the devil to control Jesus with an Atari 2600 style joystick while laughing maniacally? Why would Jesus be like this? It looks so mean. But as a general rule, if you're standing outside of a social situation and you want to know whether the words that on paper exchanged were mean and came off as terribly, you can start by just looking at the reaction of the people who were there and the people to whom the remarks were directed. Sometimes other people read the room in the moment better than you and I do across the ages of history and translation between language and culture. And it does look like that's the case here, because she's not like, how dare you, after all that has happened historically, for you to come up here with my daughter suffering the way she's suffering, and then for you to fire off that kind of stuff? Do you have any idea how offensive that is? Do you have any idea how out of line you are? Like, there's nothing like that. Instead, she goes clever. She goes almost rabbinical with him in a mostly now forgotten style of debate that was very common at the time, wherein one person would offer a common assertion assumed by many, and the other person would respond with something about, yes, but isn't it also written this? But is it not also true that this? She is playing a Jewish logic game with Jesus, a game that would be very familiar to any traveling rabbi or teacher and his students, in a style and following a structure using social rhetorical dance steps that she shouldn't know, that shouldn't be her style. So even the way she engages with Jesus demonstrates an outside of herselfness that I think is very telling about where she's at. She's not mad about his remarks, and her response says that Jesus was taking a conversational angle here he thought she would understand, and it looks like she was picking up what he was putting down. So again, in a way that was horrifying to kid me reading this passage, Jesus says, it's not right to take the children's bread and toss it to their dogs, intoning that she and her people are the dogs. But rather than getting mad, the lady says in verse 27, yes, Lord, but even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table. What an interesting turn of events. She assumes a posture of enormous humility. humility almost bordering on humiliation. I don't know that she needed to own that or tacitly agree to this pecking order that Jesus is alluding to, but her words are assuming the same posture as her body. She is on her knees before one she is calling the Son of David. If she's calling him the Son of David, she's saying, "You are a king." And here she is in this position of submission before that king, uttering words that completely defer all authority in the conversation to him, and that completely embraces the role of not just even the lowest ranking servant, but the dogs. And dogs didn't have the same cute, cuddly, loyal, sit at your feet because they're awesome and we're friends connotations that they do now. This was real close to as low as it could get for a metaphor. And I think what we see is that she's willing to accept that indignity for two reasons. One, she actually thinks that is a king. And in that culture and time, I mean, there's a certain way you respond to that sort of regal authority. And two, she thinks he's more than a king and that he could actually do something about the unresolvable, absolutely urgent crisis that afflicts her family. So then it's now and only now that we get a response to her that looks more to be in keeping with his response to the Gentile centurion in chapter 8. I don't know why I keep flipping over there. Do you hear my pages? Like, I already looked at it. I remember what it says. But it looks more in keeping with that here as we round out the exchange. It looks more in keeping with all of those statements of empathy and sympathy and compassion for the crowds that we see elsewhere. And he verbalizes this saying, "Woman, you have great faith. Your request is granted." And her daughter was healed from that very hour. Sometimes this happens, my friends. We've got so much more ahead of us on this passage, and I'm just not going to rush it. I'm personally gaining a lot from having to unpack this at the pace that we're going at right now. So we are going to get through this passage when we get through this passage. I'm going to hit pause there, and we'll just pick it right up where we left off tomorrow. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again, like immediately.